Hi, I'm meteorologist Brad Spakowitz. While I love the weather, I've had a lifelong fascination with science and technology. In fact, weekdays on Action 2 News at 4:30, I bring you a segment called 3 Brilliant Minutes, where I get to share science-related stories that just kind of catch my eye. Once again, I put together my 10 favorites from our past year for our 4th edition of 30 Brilliant Minutes. Let's get started with number 10. Sales of EVs over the past year in the U.S. has plummeted.
Plummeted?
A couple of reasons they think. First of all, consumers are a little stretched right now.
Sure.
And new vehicles, whether they're gas-powered or electric-powered,
they're cheap.
Pricey, correct. And second of all, they think that it was a function of early adopters. Those who wanted them, got them,
right.
And the rest of us are kind of hesitant,
right.
waiting to see what's going to happen, okay? But with that said, there's one other hesitancy factor for most of us when we think about electric vehicles.
How
Charging.
far can we drive?
Yeah,
How much does it cost to charge?
Well, charging problem number one is the fact that we really don't have a good infrastructure. I mean, we have gas stations on almost every corner in this country. You don't have to plan ahead when you travel. You can just find one along the way.
They're coming though, and
it is.
That just was announced not too long ago.
Yep. But obviously it's some inconvenience because you do need to plan your travels. But there's another charging problem. That problem is charging times, okay? And it really depends on the manufacturer of the vehicle, the manufacturer of the battery, how old the vehicle is, how old the battery is. All in all, if you're going to fast charge, because you can fast charge and slow charge, fast charging times range from 20 minutes to 1 hour. The average is 42 minutes.
Okay.
Now, I've never really timed filling up a tank of gas, but I would think...
You feel pretty confident to say it didn't take you 42 minutes?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And by the way, some of the older vehicles with slow 120 volt chargers, 40 to 50 hours to go from 0 to 80% charge.
That's not good.
Yeah. But again, it's getting better. In fact, it might get much better.
Okay.
Because of Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. Get a load of their latest headline. Develops a sodium battery capable of rapid charging in just a few seconds. Now, most of the batteries in our EVs now and even in our phones, they're lithium ion. Mm-hmm. These are sodium ion batteries, but it's a whole new type of battery, Chris. A couple of things. They designed brand new different materials for the negative and positive end of the battery. And electricity flows from negative to positive. So we have these new superconductor materials, and it accelerates the flow of electrons during charging and discharging. Now, I know you're probably wondering, does that mean it discharges in a couple of seconds? No, because it's really, as I said, it's a new type of battery. They call it an energy storage system, much like a supercapacitor, which stores a charge and holds it, and then slowly discharges it, okay? So it's interesting, but there's a whole bunch of other advantages. Salt is far more inexpensive than
materials,
lithium.
Just raw materials.
And far more abundant, 500 times more abundant than lithium. And again, not only could it be applied to batteries in electric vehicles, but in your phone, in your tablet, just anything that is rechargeable. So it's very exciting. There are other people as well working on these sodium batteries, but they're the first ones to really crack it open where so this has a lot of potential. So it's kind of exciting. Penguins snatch 11 hours of sleep through seconds-long micronaps. Now, bear in mind, we've talked about sleep deficits before, all of the risks. Increased risk of cardiac behavior. This is in humans now, okay? Weight gain, foggy
anxiety,
thinking.
stress,
yes,
all that stuff.
Dementia, I mean, the list is lengthy. So this is really shocking that they only micronap, okay? So let's take a look at the study. They implanted electrodes on 14 birds, just on, not in the head, okay? Recorded electrical activity in the brain and the neck muscles. Used motion sensing equipment and GPS to study body movement and location, and also used video recordings and direct observation over multiple days. So what did they find? The penguins' sleep occurred while standing or while laying to incubate their eggs. The average sleep lasted about 3.91 seconds. In total, they slept more than 10,000 times a day.
What?
Now, just for fun, I thought, okay, let's do the math for all of you math fanatics, okay? 3.91 seconds times 10,000, 39,100 seconds divided by 60 to convert it to minutes.
Yep.
651 minutes divided by 60 to get hours. 10 hours and 51 minutes, but only 4 seconds at a time.
I'm sorry, I missed what you were saying. I was taking a nap.
Yeah, right. So here's some other things that they found about, okay? So the penguins on the outside of the colony actually got longer and deeper bouts of sleep than those in the center because it's so tightly packed with penguins and they're moving around. And one of the big problems is they have to keep an eye on the other penguins because they want to steal the stones to make their own nests. So they're always, kind of on the lookout
Well, that's
for
why
that.
you can only sleep for 4 seconds.
I guess. And then, of course, researchers also point out that maybe some of the other things here is it might be just through evolution where being on the lookout for predators and
Sure.
things like that. But it's just an interesting thing about these poor little,
4
poor
seconds
little
at a-
penguins.
I think we ought to institute micronaps here at work, though.
We are going to talk about the IoT. Do you know what the IoT is?
No idea.
The IoT stands
International Olympic something?
No,
Oh,
it's
oh.
the Internet of Things. What might the Internet of Things be? It's a network of physical devices that can collect and share data over the Internet. These are little machines. I'll give you an example. Some of you have smartphone devices, a Ring doorbell,
Sure.
or security cameras, or plugs, or even now refrigerators and microwaves are all smart. They're using the Internet to communicate this information. Chris, at the end of 2025, the end of next year, it is estimated there will be 22 billion little devices using the Internet because also manufacturing, doctors, it's being used everywhere. It's an amazing technology. Why wouldn't you? With that said, what do you think is coming next?
Robots.
Yes.
Oh.
But more importantly, the ocean of things.
Oh,
What
okay.
is the ocean of things? Well, I'm going to give
I'm
you
hooked. I don't know about you, but I am hooked.
I'm going to give you a hint. It's sort of being driven by the U.S. government. It's a program started by DARPA, the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, okay?
Those mysterious DARPA folks.
Yes, and here's what's going to help them, or at least one of the devices. This is blown up. This thing is actually a little mechanical device. Here's the story from Binghamton University where they did the research. Self-powered bugs that can skim across water to detect and relay environmental data. What kind of environmental data? Water temperature, pollution levels. How about movements of commercial vessels and aircrafts? Does that sound like something DARPA might be interested in?
Very much so.
Probably. But here's the interesting thing. It's fueled by bacterial spore production. They don't really describe exactly how that works, but it can generate about 1 milliwatt of power just by sucking in water and using some of the nutrients and making the spores do their thing. How interesting is that?
Little bots.
Yes.
Little tiny little bots. Bacteria bots. All right, Brad, thanks so much.
Chris, our fingerprints are becoming increasingly more valuable
Okay.
because of biometric fingerprint security, where a device will read the little ridges and valleys on your fingertip to identify you. You might use it to get into
Yes.
your tablet, your phone, all sorts of things that are still up and coming, okay? So, in fact, take a look at this. It is indeed an effective way to secure digital data and devices. In fact, it's more secure and more convenient than traditional things like usernames, passwords, pins, text me a code, that sort of thing.
16-character passwords.
Right, it's just fingerprint and you're in or you're out, okay? The fingerprint authentication market is estimated to be worth nearly $100 billion by 2032. So this is already in wide use and is really going to start to explode just about everywhere, okay? But the question is, how safe is it really? Because it is not foolproof. It often relies on only partial matches. In other words, it doesn't analyze the entire fingerprint, just looks for key portions.
Sure.
And hackers can actually spoof biometric data by making a fake silicone fingerprint, or some can use wax. But this is, and when I read this, Chris, it's like, what? Some people who are aware of this possibility no longer will allow their fingerprints to be included in photographs because a thief could actually trace your fingerprint and make one of these silicone fingerprints and use it for, I know.
So now you have to take your pictures like this?
Well, it gets more interesting, okay? I found this report. It's a 16-page document about some research that was done in a joint effort between some researchers in China and here in the United States. The research says Print Listener uncovering the vulnerability of fingerprint authentication via the finger friction sound.
The what?
I know, but you know what? Here's the good news. I'm going to bullet point it for you. Okay, here's the bottom line. They demonstrated that malware could be deployed that would use a device's microphone to listen to and record a user's swiping sound as they slide their finger over the touch screen. Whether you're scrolling this way, or touching on things, your fingerprints are making a noise and it could be picked up by the microphone. But that's only part of it. The recorded sounds are then analyzed by algorithms, which are computer programs, to extract fingerprint features. Now you're, okay, come on. You've got to be kidding me. First
Each
of all,
fingerprint has its own distinct sound?
correct. Okay, how successful can they recreate them? Up to 26.5% of partial fingerprints, which the machines only
Sure.
use a partial print, and 9.3% of complete fingerprints within 5 attempts. Now again, they've demonstrated this could be done. That doesn't mean it's not in use by evil forces
Sure.
yet, but the bottom line is we need to think about protecting our prints. We're going to have fun. You at home, I want you to join in as well. I have 5 science stories.
Okay.
You all need to tell me if they're true or an April Fool.
Okay.
Are you ready?
To be a fool? Yes.
Are you ready? Let's take a look at study number 1. The study finds chickens produce more eggs when acorns are added to their diet. So this actually comes from Indiana State College. They added ground acorns from red oaks and white oaks to the chicken's diet. So it was a supplement. It wasn't in place of their typical diet. They found that egg production actually increased as much as 18%. They believe the protein content and the amino acids found in the nuts provide more, quote, egg-making nutrients. They also found that the chickens developed a little bit more lean muscle mass. Chris, is this true or an April Fool?
I'm going with true because USDA.gov.
Chris, this is in fact an April Fool.
Go big or go home.
Let's try, you know about the labor shortage in the country right now? There's more jobs
Sure.
than there are people. Take a look at this one. NASA opens astronaut applications. Are they just looking for astronauts off the street? You have to have some pretty strong qualifications. U.S. citizen, have a master's degree in engineering, biological science, physical science, computer science, have worked in those professions for 3 years, or you have to be a jet aircraft pilot essentially and be able to, of course, pass their physical. Chris, is NASA really opening astronaut applications to the general public? Is this true or an April Fool?
I'm going true.
Chris, this is indeed
Yes!
true. They have, in fact, extended the application process all the way through April 16th. So there's still time if you
Okay.
want to jump on board.
Hey, you could use your tax refund
There-
to complete the application process.
I have another space-related
Okay.
one for you, okay? China working on giant railgun to shoot astronauts into space, okay? They're working on a giant electromagnetic launch track that would hurl a massive 50-ton space plane into orbit. It would achieve speeds of Mach 1.6, and they could therefore forego a first stage of their rocket. It would save fuel and money. Chris, is China really going to shoot astronauts into
No.
space? This
No.
story is absolutely true.
Oh,
It is 100% true. Okay, we're running out of time. We got to pick up the pace here. In a first, researchers make electricity from northern lights. This comes from the University of Greenland. They created a semi-rigid giant copper mesh. They said it looked like a fishing net measuring nearly 50 feet by 50 feet. The mesh was transported aloft by a large balloon, and when the balloon carried the mesh through the northern lights, it induced a small current in the mesh. They think it was about 1.5 volts, enough to illuminate a small LED. Chris, is this true?
No.
It is an April Fool. Wait, there's one more. We have 19
Yeah,
seconds, but it's a
do
good
it.
one, okay? Used pacemakers can be donated to pets. In your will, you can have your pacemaker donated to a dog in need after you pass away. Donated pacemakers greatly lower the cost of cardiac care for canines, and all you have to do is just coordinate the whole thing with a funeral home. Chris, is this true or an April Fool?
I hope it's not true.
Chris, this in fact is
Okay.
true. Thank you everyone for playing Is It True or an April Fool? Stick around for the top 5. That's coming up next. Welcome back to 30 Brilliant Minutes. Let's get right to my top 5. There's a surprising link between music and brain health. We've had other stories in this segment between music and learning and music and brain health, but this gives us a little bit of a closer look at what might be going on there.
Fine-tunes it,
Yes.
if you will.
Okay, so the research actually came from the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom, and here's what they did. They analyzed the data on 1,107 people over the age of 40 without a dementia diagnosis, okay? And they actually gave these people little memory tests that they needed to perform, okay? And when I say perform, it was just score on, okay? And then what they did, they mapped the cognitive ability, the test results, with self-reported musical ability. Can you play a musical instrument? Do you sing in a choir? Do you like to listen to music? Okay, that's, so they just mapped it out. So here are some of the things that they found. There was significantly better performance in working memory of individuals who played a musical instrument or who sang or overall had musical ability, maybe the ability to play multiple instruments or play an instrument and sing at the same time, okay?
Walk and chew gum.
Correct. However, for those who only listen to music, there was no memory enhancement. So it has to do with the brain, hand, whole coordination. There's so much going on during music, keeping rhythm, you know.
Right.
The instrument, if you're singing.
Being in on proper key,
yes.
Intonation, all that.
It's
syncopation.
It's a lot of work. It really is. Here's what one of the study's authors said. Overall, we think that being musical could be a way of harnessing the brain's agility and resilience, known as cognitive reserve. Think about that, brain's agility and resilience. Right. So again, that's
the key component there.
Correct.
Right? Yeah.
Okay, and she also offers some other things, some advice. Okay. Hey,
that was going to be one of my questions.
Never too late to learn or return playing an instrument and or singing, okay? Also, the other thing is that the cognitive boost was highest for those who play keyboards.
Of course it is. That's the hardest.
Yeah, but they're portable now, you know.
Well, it's not because they're big. They're just hard.
They are.
The left hand, never mind.
Yeah, but that was an interesting finding. Yeah. And she adds, you know, just continuing to play any instrument later in life led to increased memory benefits. So something we all might want to consider. Cataracts occur when proteins in your eye's lens clump together, clouds the lens, makes difficult vision, that sort of thing. And it's caused by a number of factors and sometimes a combination: aging, family history, medications, eye injuries, eye surgery, pregnancy, high blood pressure, excessive exposure to sunlight. The list goes on.
It's a long one.
Yeah. And the thing about cataracts, there's really no way to get rid of them other than through surgery, and thankfully we have pretty successful rates on surgery. Okay. But there might be something new right around the corner. Okay. This comes from the National Institutes of Health. Ground squirrel study points to potential development of a cataract drug, okay? So take a look at these two pictures that have been provided. This is the eye of a 13-lined ground squirrel, which we refer to as a striped gopher, which is found here in Wisconsin. Okay. It's throughout much of the central North America. Okay?
Gotcha.
But the lens on the left is when they hibernate, they actually develop cataracts.
Really?
And when they awaken, within hours, the lens clears. Within hours.
On its own.
This is a remarkable discovery. Of course, the big question is, how can this be? Okay? Here's what's happening. They identified a protein known as RNF114 that's responsible for reversing this lens transparency just upon the rewarming cycle as the animal awakens. Okay? So early studies using non-hibernator cataracts from rats, okay? They cooled the eyes with the cataracts of the rats down to 39 degrees, the same as a hibernating gopher, and when they reintroduced the RNF114 and they warmed that eye up, it had a rapid clearing as well.
Wow.
Okay? So again, it's just a finding, proof in principle, saying we've been able to replicate this in another animal. They need to obviously fine-tune it, do more research, but it looks very promising.
Gopher is not just for beating on the football field anymore.
Right. Do you have any of these in your home, these black plastic cooking utensils? This was actually a collection I found in my home. Okay?
Are they still there after you read this?
They are all ready to go away.
I see.
Forever. And you're probably going to think the same thing. So here's the story. The black plastic used for your kitchen utensils may contain toxic chemicals. This story appeared at tasteofhome.com, but this story is making its rounds on the internet. I also saw it at CNN, the Washington Post, Delish, Toxic-Free Future, The Kitchen, and that's not a typo, that's how they spell it, and many others, okay? Because here's the bottom line on what they found, Chris. Researchers tested these black plastics, and they found about 70% of them contain flame retardants, which are cancer-causing substances. And in fact, the levels astronomical, because what's allowed by law is 10 parts per million, and most of these things have anywhere from 5 to as much as 1,200 times more than the legal limit. They're loaded, okay?
I am visualizing a few things right now that are going in the trash.
Well, here's the problem. How can this be? How can this be? Here's the problem. Black plastic is difficult to recycle to begin with because you can only turn it into something else black, where other colors, you can mix them to make different colors, but black is always only going to be black plastic, okay? So many of these black plastics containing these flame retardants, the toxic chemicals, come from TVs, computers, and other electronics that typically operate warm, and also it's to prevent them from catching fire or from exploding. So, I mean, it's a safety issue in the plastic when it's a TV, but the big question is this: how is that toxic black plastic getting mixed with food-grade plastic in the recycling process? Nobody knows if it's a deliberate thing or an accidental thing, but it's obviously happening, okay? And it's not just your kitchen utensils. It's been found in children's toys, takeout containers, those little grocery meat containers, produce trays. Yeah. It's everywhere. And again, as I mentioned, you know, it's these flame retardants, it's PFAS, you know, those forever chemicals. We've talked many times about the dangers to the body there, carcinogenic, disrupts the nervous system, your immune system, causes problems with children. Nasty, nasty, nasty stuff, okay? So obviously the big question, what can we all do? Get rid of the black plastic utensils immediately, right? Switch to stainless steel utensils. Non-stick cookware is a tough one. You can use wood there or some high quality nylon materials.
Or silicone?
Silicone is fine as long as it's a single piece, okay? That's the important part, that it's a single piece. Remove any food items from those black plastic containers, put them into a glass container or something else, stainless steel, whatever, and do not put them in microwaves. It's just like the black cookware.
Even though they say microwave safe?
Oh, they're microwave safe. Are they safe for humans though? That's the question.
Gotcha. Who's your friend feeling down?
Everybody's feeling down. In fact, that's where we start with some statistics. 5% of people around the world are thought to be living with depression. 5%, that's 400 million people.
That's a lot.
Right, it is. And today's study is about depression, and it sheds a little bit of light. It probably raises more questions than answers, but again, that's a good place to begin.
Sure.
Right? So here is...
Got to have the conversation, right?
That's right. This study actually appeared at nature.com. Elevated body temperature is associated with depressive symptoms. Elevated body temperature.
Okay, so when you sent me this today, Brad, full disclosure, Brad always sends me a couple of headlines and a tease about what he's going to talk about today. I have an idea of why this might work for me, but we'll get to it down the line.
Okay, well, let's take a look at the study. It was actually done at the University of California, San Francisco. Okay, they analyzed data from 20,880 individuals from 106 countries. They do believe that this is the largest study of its kind. Okay, the mean age of the participants in the study was roughly 47 years, 53% male, 47% female, so not quite 50-50. The participants self-reported their depressive symptoms on a scale of 1 to 10, you know, little, if any, to severe, okay? And they also then, correspondingly, their body temperatures were tracked, either by self-reporting, some of them wore sensors, but they kept track of the scale of depression and their body temperature for 7 months.
Okay.
So it's a pretty good body.
It's extensive,
yeah, okay. So again, here's what they found. And again, the key words here, Chris, suggests, associated. It's not a definite link, but it appears as though there's some connection, that people with depression tend to have a higher body temperature. In fact, the more severe the depression, the higher the body temperature was found throughout this study. Now, the big question is, again, is the depression...
Chicken or the egg, right?
Is the depression creating the higher body temperature? Is the higher body temperature creating the depression? They don't really know, but here are some possible reasons that they say that should be explored further. Depression might be related to metabolic processes that generates extra body heat.
Okay.
Or maybe the individuals, their bodies just aren't quite as efficient as cooling themselves as most other people's bodies are. Or maybe it's something else totally,
Sure.
without reason, that somehow is impacting both body temperature and depression. But again, there certainly seems to be some sort of link between body temperature and depression. But think, what if the solution to depression was as simple as lowering a body temperature?
Well, okay, so here's what I thought, and maybe this is way off base, but if I'm too hot, I cannot sleep. And if I cannot sleep, I'm cranky.
Yes.
And then mad. And then I get sad.
I understand.
Did they think about that?
I think we can all relate to that.
Okay.
Especially when you can't sleep and then you're frustrated.
Right.
And
then,
it is a vicious cycle.
Right. See?
Yep.
You've solved all my problems. Once again, Brad.
This is probably the most important topic we've ever done, okay?
Wow.
We're going to talk about reading retention and comprehension, and not just with children, also with adults, but I want you to keep in the back of your memory about children, okay? So with that said, I want to introduce you to the researchers who did this research. They are from Australia. There they are. And here is their study and their finding. Reading on screens instead of paper is a less effective way to absorb and retain information. Chris, I have wanted to do this story for 3 years. I have seen similar research with the same finding 3 times, but the first time it was done by the paper making. So they had a little agenda. The second time I saw it, it was done by a book publishing firm, so I felt, well, they probably have some vested interest. But finally, it comes from a university.
Independent research.
Okay. So with this in mind, here are just some of the bullet points on what they found. They call it the screen inferiority effect, okay? So again, just some bullet points from their study. This whole notion that reading off of a screen is less effective, it applies across languages and writing systems. Think about that. So no matter where you are, what you speak, or what you read, globally,
it's the same result.
For all humans. Okay. And you have to bear in mind that reading is sort of a recent development in our history. Only about 5,500 years have we been reading. Okay. When people become immersed in a narrative like a novel, it's not affected too much by reading on a screen, but comprehension drops when you're using a screen to read information-dense text like a textbook for study. Think about that in children, okay? The effect is more pronounced for less skilled readers, defined as people that just don't read as effectively, and also people who have read less than 15 years. So again, children. Physical factors such as eye strain, brightness, comfort, that might be adding to it. And they also say that, with screens, we tend to have less serious content where people have a tendency to skim. So that might apply to adults. I think I'm guilty of that. Screens also come with built-in distractions like frequent notifications, animated ads, pop-ups, the whole kit and caboodle if you're on any social media or whatever, okay? So that obviously competes for your attention. But here's the big takeaway. We don't yet understand what this effect is going to have on children who are learning to read primarily on screens now, and we're likely not to know for another 10 to 15 years. And there you have it, my top 10 favorites of 2024. If you liked what you saw and maybe learned something along the way, don't forget you can watch 3 brilliant minutes weekdays on Action 2 News at 4:30. And if you have a topic you think I should check into, please email me with your ideas. I hope you enjoyed watching this program as much as I enjoyed sharing them with you. Thanks for watching.